we're really, really pleased she could come and speak to us tonight on women, gender, slavery, and abolition in Brazil. And I was looking at her CV earlier, and wealth of experience over decades is amazing. I'm not going to introduce her because the CV was too big. No, that's not the real reason. Our host, Professor Emily West, is going to introduce Maria Helena. They've been working together on lots of projects in recent years, and Emily will be hosting and Q&Aing Helena. And of course, we'll then open up to you. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Dr. Laura Sandy, and I work at the University of Liverpool. I'm the co-director for the Centre for the Study of International Slavery. And it's really nice to see lots of faces that I've seen before at different places all over the city. So thanks for coming out this evening. The weather's not been brilliant, but we've had a lot of really interesting stuff on this month. So Maria Helena, just as a very quick thing, why are you in England? She's a visiting Leverhulme Trust professor at the University of Reading, where Professor Emily West works at the moment. But I'm actually going to do a tiny bit of history to Emily, because she also had a really long CV too, and I got a bit bored of reading it because it was just too much. And so these great women first, and academics not second, but I like to praise women for being great women, have a lot of achievements between them. But Emily, some of you may know, many probably not, started her career in Liverpool as an undergraduate in the history department. She then did this awful thing. She went to Manchester to do an MA, and frankly, this could have been a big mistake for her life, because her husband is an extremely proud Scouser, his word, not mine, and he has no time or love for Liverpool, and actually refuses to visit Liverpool to this day.
Manchester.
Manchester, yeah. No, he loves Liverpool. He's actually in the city right now, having a drink. So he's with us in spirit. However, Emily was saved because she got an ESRC PhD grant to do a PhD rather. At the University of Liverpool, and obviously her husband has forgiven her transgression, and they went on to get married. But Emily stayed in Liverpool for a bit of time. She worked at the University of Liverpool teaching, and at Liverpool Hope University, and went to Newcastle before she ended up at the University of Reading, where she has worked since 1999. Is that right?
Yeah, thank you, Laura.
It was on your CV. It's a good number. Anyway, so she's also currently the chair of the British American 19th Century Historians Association, and doing a great job there. And her career, I would say, is tirelessly focused on the research of the lives of enslaved couples and enslaved women. She's produced over 20 chapters and articles, and done some brilliant edited collections. I'll come on to this in a second. However, she's also produced 3 books: Chains of Love, Slave Couples in the Antebellum South Carolina, 2004, Family or Freedom, People of Colour in the Antebellum South, and Enslaved Women in America. However, as we all, I think, strive to, you've been doing this for a long time, so again, well done. We want to get our research to much wider audiences. So Emily put together a digital exhibit called Hidden Voices, Enslaved Women in the Low Country in the US South with the College of Charleston, and that's an online digital exhibit. Her current project, and I guess what led her to Maria Helena in many ways, focuses on wet nursing and feeding, and she looks at enslaved women's experiences of feeding others as a form of gendered exploitation, but at the same time as a means by which women found pleasure, nurture, and empowerment. So, of course, with all these brilliant projects and amazing work, she's been funded widely in the UK and the US, the ESRC, the Arts Foundation, the Leverhulme Trust, which again has brought Maria here from Brazil, the British Academy, and all over the US. And a quick note, just to be, again, very pro-women. At this moment, Emily did a project, as I said, on free people of colour, and this may have been a major achievement in terms of winning these very hard-to-get Leverhulme grants. But at the same time, when you have a young family and you're a woman in any job or career, it can be hard to juggle those. And so this grant also funded a postdoctorate position of someone being sent to America. And that's where I came in, and I met Emily. Although she interviewed many amazing candidates, the panel decided that I should get the job. I remember it was on my birthday, and I thought it was terrible that I was having an interview on my birthday. And yet it started the beginning of a great work friendship at the start, and hopefully more than that friendship now. And the book about how institutionalised racism and laws about slavery can affect free people too, and that free people of colour under slavery were having to make terrible decisions due to poverty and family about putting themselves back into slavery, incredibly. So it's a brilliant book published in 2012. So Emily not only gave work to somebody else, she gave my family and my friends a relief of my endless chattering about slavery, because she sent me to America while she was in the UK doing the work. And I can say, since I met you, I've never really met many people who do so much work for younger people, early career academics, PhDs, postdocs, people in their community, and doing amazing projects that link people across the globe, which again is why we have someone from Brazil with us today. So, I'm going to stop talking. You guys did a great co-edited book, which I'm sure you'll come on to, and I'm going to hand over to Emily to tell us about the brilliant Maria Helena Machado from the University of São Paulo in Brazil.
Thank you so much, Laura, for that generous introduction. And I just want to say thank you to all of you for coming out on a Friday evening when the sun's actually shining, albeit briefly, in Liverpool. And really, really appreciate you making this trip up to the Blue Coat. I haven't been to the Blue Coat since it was somewhere else many, many years ago. So it's great to actually be here and see what an amazing space this is. Can people hear me okay without the mic? Yeah, okay, good, good. If my voice drops, please just let me know, but it's always a bit cumbersome holding microphones, so it's much better without one, really. I'm going to say a little bit about why we're here today and in my introduction to Maria Helena Machado. And I guess primarily we're here because Brazilian slavery is so often overlooked in the Anglophone world. And yet this is a country that's so important in the history of transatlantic slavery, as Maria Helena will shortly be explaining. One of the reasons why I was really keen to apply for some money to get Maria Helena over here is that she's, obviously she speaks Portuguese as a Brazilian, but she's able to tell us something about this really, really rich tradition of slavery studies in Brazil, especially when it comes to thinking about women, gender, and abolition. So my formal introduction here, I think Maria Helena's really devoted her career to the study of the social history. I think that's really important. We're both social historians interested in everyday life. The social history of slavery, abolition, and post-abolition in Brazil. And she's also published on a really wide variety of themes as well. Her first book, since we're dating all of these things, was in 1987. And this was an analysis of crimes by enslaved people in the 5 decades that preceded abolition in Brazil, showing how these people organised themselves to impose limits onto their work rhythms and how they were able to try to establish bearable conditions within the coffee plantations of southeast Brazil. She also published a book in 1991 that explores enslaved people's revolts and the radical political participation of freed, to be freed, and free poor people involved in abolitionist movements. Professor Machado has also published on 19th century diaries and travel literature in order to reconstruct Brazilian conceptions of abolition, race and gender vis-a-vis those in Europe and North America, including Brazil through the eyes of William James. I mean, she really is a very wide-ranging historian, which is why I admire your work so much. She additionally curates and publishes catalogues on 19th century slavery and racial photography, quite a difficult topic, which we'll be talking about soon. And in the last decade, Professor Machado's work has increasingly focused on slavery, women and gender, including motherhood, wet nursing, which is how I came to be familiar with her work, and Brazil's so-called free womb laws. Again, we'll be hearing more about this shortly. She's the co-author, along with me and Camelia Cowling and Diana Payton, of an edited collection called Motherhood, Childlessness, and the Care of Children in Atlantic Slave Societies, which came out in 2020. And it also appeared before then as 2 special editions of Slavery and Abolition and the Women's History Review. We've also got Andrea Livesey in the room, who also has a fantastic article in one of these special collections, so we're really glad to see you here tonight as well, Andrea. Thanks so much to Liverpool University, to the Centre for the Study of International Slavery, to Laura, to Mary, to the Blue Coat for putting this event together. Perhaps during the Q&A there'll be plenty of time for questions. You know, one thing that we can also pick up on here is something about writing history together, doing history together, thinking transnationally in this vital yet often overlooked history and what that can add to our history. I think especially when we're thinking about slavery and gender, you know, we need to think in terms of comparisons and contrasts, and especially, and I say this as a US historian myself, this is how I was trained, you know, moving away from this sort of Anglocentric paradigm that really centres the United States and think about other places which are also important in this history. So, what's going to happen is I'm going to be asking Maria Helena a series of questions, and I'm trying not to think back to, I can't remember the name of it, there was a show in the 1990s with two people sitting at the front, sort of, and anyone remember that comedy show? And they always sort of meant to be very serious historians, and the conversations always degenerated into farce. We'll try not to do that. But I'm going to be asking Maria Helena a series of questions about her work, about thinking about the importance of moving away from this Anglophone emphasis. Brazil, of course, it was a huge Portuguese colony, then a huge country in its own right, a large enslaved population, and it has an extensive historiography. So we've got lots of ground to cover, but there will be plenty of time for questions, both, you know, perhaps more formally here than more informally afterwards. This is very much designed as an informal discussion. And I have sort of one slight caveat at first, and this isn't a problem at all, but I know Maria Helena will feel more comfortable with me raising this, but that's just that if we could all remember that English isn't Maria Helena's first language, of course. That's Portuguese, so she's speaking in a second language. We all need to be a little bit patient with that at times. If things go wrong, you have your phone there. We may need Google Translate, which has been a great help to us since Maria Helena's been in the UK. But hopefully we won't, but do please bear with us with that. And another thing we're going to do is simply look at some of the extraordinarily powerful and evocative collection of images that Maria Helena has curated and collected during the course of her career, which can really convey to us something about this extensive history. Okay, so I think that's enough from me, and I'm going to start with, you know, the sort of really easy question, Maria Helena, and that's just, you know, first of all, can you perhaps tell us, you know, something in a more narrative sense about slavery and Brazilian history, about this wide picture?
Thank you so much, Emily. Thank you so much for everybody for coming, and to Laura, Mary, and the Center for International Slavery. Liverpool University is a big privilege as a Brazilian historian who is put down south, and then, you know, have the opportunity to talk and to exchange ideas with such important scholars and with the public in general. I'm so sorry about my English. I'm very self-conscious about my accent, so I'm trying to feel comfortable. But, you know, sometimes things just disappear from my mind, or I think in Portuguese. But anyway, Brazil was a big Portuguese colony. Everybody knows that. Slavery started very early. 1516, we already had transatlantic traffic and Africans landing in the Portuguese colony. We have as well, not so huge, but like 2 million today, more or less. The calculation of indigenous population was about 2 million, scattered along a very huge territory, who were captured and put on slavery. But because slavery, at the beginning, the plantation, sugarcane, cotton, coffee, and so many other commodities start to be planted in Brazil. The African population starts to increase, and slavery went in Brazil until 1880. So you were the last American nation to abolish slavery. Of course, slavery is still existing in some places in Asia. But in America, Brazil was the last, with Cuba Cuba just abolished a few years before. They have the same kind of laws, the amelioration laws in the 70s decade, 1870. But what is really characteristic of Brazilian slavery is that we didn't have any sector through 16 to 19, end of 19th century, almost any sector who didn't produce with slaves. So differently than like US, for example, when you have the north, you have up the mountains in the south, free peasants. In Brazil, everybody was slavocratic. That is incredible, because we have big plantations from the Catholic Church, and all persons, everybody who has a little money, buy a slave. And we have a huge, but really huge urban slavery. Rio de Janeiro, you may know, Salvador, Recife, all the big cities are completely tended by slave work, slave barbers, carriers, potters, vendors, everything. So what made slavery in Brazil very characteristic was to spread out. We say that slavery contaminated the whole body of society and achieved high levels of achievement, or no, people who just legitimize slavery. Slavery are legitimized by most of the population, and was so huge that for some periods, that is difficult to talk about that, but slaves bought slaves. In order to free themselves, they buy slaves, train them, and then exchange with the owner. So slavery was something that nobody at 19th century, the century of emancipation since the last quarter of 18th century to 1888, everybody was thinking in America about abolition, but in Brazil, slavery are completely consolidated and expanded in the 19th century. Brazil achieved independence in 1822, and after that, amazingly, slavery expanded. You know, it's a terrible situation. We, the Portuguese and then the Brazilian nation signed many agreements with British authorities to end transatlantic traffic, but Brazilian empire, because we have empire between 1822 to 1889, after 1 year after abolition, the empire fell off. And fell off. Okay, then you understand. The empire acted as a pirate state because they know that they can allow transatlantic traffic, but it just closed their eyes. And then in the 83rd, for example, the first national law against traffic. Everybody's still trafficking slavery. After the 1831, entering Brazil, 750,000 Africans as a slave. After the prohibition, after the ban of traffic. Can you imagine that? So appears a proverb who says, to the English eyes, we banned traffickers, and now we still saying when you want to do something just formal, it's to bridge the ice. We are not doing that. So it's incredible, the force and this situation make Brazilian society today is still struggling with the traces, with racism, and with a deep conception of the other. Entering Brazil, almost 5 million Africans. And we have today 56% of the population, Brazilian population, by the 2022 census, is black or mixed or indigenous. So, and white people is auto-declaration, is 43%. So we are the largest black country outside Africa.
That's so interesting, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in that wide-ranging answer, I think really what you're telling us is something both about sort of the scale of slavery in Brazil, and I guess also something about its embeddedness in society.
Yeah, exactly.
The diversity in terms of thinking about, because I'm kind of thinking here, I've got a sort of a triangle in my mind, of the United States and the Caribbean and Brazil. And there's something about the sort of the diversity of different forms of enslavement in Brazil, really showing just how embedded it is and how entrenched in so many realms of life. And then also, perhaps this is something again we can come to at the end as well. This important long-term legacy of slavery in Brazilian society. I wondered, just sort of following up on that, and again perhaps thinking a little bit comparatively about abolition itself in 1888, because we know, of course, that abolition in Brazil, for example, it's very different to in the United States, of course, which fights a war over slavery. It's also way later than, for example, abolition in the British Caribbean, although also plagued by long-term issues of structural racial discrimination thereafter. But can you say a little bit more, perhaps, about sort of, how abolition came about, and also about this really interesting, as far as we're concerned for our work, this so-called free womb policy and what that meant?
Yeah, I think I have to compliment that in the Iberian tradition, slaves can, not easily, but formally can buy their freedom by money or by contracts of work. This is a situation when, if you don't have the instruments like a good overseas and a structure to control the work of slave, it's better if you promise. If you give me 20 years of faithful work, I give you a freedom letter. Of course, in Brazil, slaves at the top survive 15 years, not more. After that, they are dead or handicapped, very ill, because conditions are very bad. So, but anyway, this situation of this tradition, this custom of buying freedom, make that slavery in Brazil or freeing people all the time. So when I say post-emancipation, I say I can understand that is occurring during slavery and not just after.
A process.
It's a process, constant process. In the beginning of 19th century, 1/3 of Brazilian population around independence was made of slaves. 1/3 free black population, 1/3 whites, between commas, because there is no really white people in Brazil. We have a different, this is changing a lot, different conception of color. If you have some money, it doesn't matter if you are not white, you can turn to be a white. Because there's a huge territory with very few white people, so cooptation is on and on and on. There's a proverb, a British traveler went at the end of 18th century to Bahia. He was ill, he bought a farm, and then one day he saw a black army soldier, captain. And he said to his neighbor, isn't it prohibited to Africans to be in the army? He said, he was black, now he's a captain. So it is, make you clear, clarify what's going on, many.
Relative,
yeah. People, the plantation owners, white or not so white people, are having lots of mistress and burying many bastards. In Brazil, the index of the rates of formal marriage are very low.
So that's lots of illegitimate
illegitimate children of non-white. They can be coopted in more, a formal family in many ways. So many people were not black, or not white, but considered socially as white. That can make a misconception of racial democracy, which was consolidated in the 20th century in Brazil. So it was a huge struggle to face the, something false, not real, falseness of the conception of racial democracy.
Thank you. And yeah, it says something as well about, the social constructions around ethnicity, colour, whiteness and blackness. Again, all really, really interesting to hear about within this specific regime, and again, thinking about the differences between Brazil and elsewhere. I want to probe you now a little bit, if I can, about thinking about some of the sources that we might use for studying slavery. One thing that we know, of course, is that the history of Brazilian slavery really lends itself to sort of thinking perhaps in more interdisciplinary ways. There are huge collections of images, of paintings in Brazil. And also what we know as well is that the relatively late date of Brazilian abolition meant that there's also quite an extensive development of photography in Brazil prior to abolition. That's been of particular interest to us because we both work on wet nursing, and there's quite a number of images. It was seemingly it was something that elite white families in Brazil would do, is that they'd actually have a photograph taken with the enslaved wet nurse of infant children. So you commonly get these photos of sort of white infant children with enslaved nursemaids. There's actually one from Brazil in the Slavery Museum here in Liverpool, which we saw earlier on today. So thinking in terms of perhaps that sort of interdisciplinary angle, can you say a little bit about both your work with images, whether we're talking about paintings, photographs, working as a curator, and how you think that enables us to learn more about slavery, thinking differently about the types of sources we have?
Brazil has the biggest slave collection images in the world because Photography started very early in Brazil. There's a French man living in São Paulo province who discovered photography independently then. The other place, he started to do images in the 820s, and Abolition was late. So we have a huge collection. And then you can see, for example, this one is at coffee plantation in the 80s. You know, a group of children and adolescents harvest coffee. But as slavery was so widespread and enslaved people are inside the houses, oh no, this is abolition. Oh, come. That's a wet nurse. Was fancy to important. Everybody has wet nurses. Everybody who can buy or rent a wet nurse, they should have them. So there's a huge collection of wet nurses with their white charge, like holding a white charge. And then, you know, for many decades of 20th century, people are saying that, oh, we have racial democracy. See the ties of affection, intimacy between this woman who loves so much this white baby. That's another one. In Bahia, you see they are much more, they're more Africanist in the image, because 85% of the population was from African descent. So even the 19th century this shows this. But you know, that was one of the most difficult prejudice to destroy, to decompose, because everybody thinks that, oh, you know, we are living with this image of this nurturing black women in our blood, embedded in our society. Because, of course, slavery was based in the womb. You have to reproduce. If you reproduce in Africa or in Brazil or elsewhere, of course. But reproduction is the key of slavery. But women are workers as well. So they are double enslaved. And their wombs are be appropriated. And what you have to think, you have, not for you, but for some Brazilian middle class that are, you know, idealizing the Brazilian history, you have to say, where's her child? And her child was sent to what we call Roda dos Expostos, a place where you leave the child there to be cared for, you know, for someone is institutional in Portuguese world, Iberian world in general, or, you know, there's a custom to give them mandioca, a kind of flour that we have in Brazil, that substitute wheat, and like porridge. Since the very beginning. So the rate in newborn death are very high. Brazilian slavery was almost never able to keep the demography. It's always negative, but now we know it's not because of the infertility of women. They still having the child, but the rates of death of newborns and toddlers was very high. Because in Brazil there is no much hunger. You know, there's lots of land to plant. Everybody eats more or less, but no care for the child.
And I know you've written really poignantly about this experience
Yeah.
of women forced to wet nurse, you know, and some of these stories are just so tragic because, of course, the women, they, you know, that enslavers forced them to feed a white infant at the expense of their own children. Those children are you know, then sadly, you know, often subject to infant mortality, fed, you know, different forms of flour, for example, or pap, for example, sugar and water, all sorts of, you know, foodstuffs that babies shouldn't have, and they die. And of course, what's interesting about all this as well, of course, is that a lot of this actually comes from white women. You know, white women are the instigators of the employment of deployment of wet nurses. You know, so I think that's something that's quite challenging for us. And
there is a book of memoirs in Brazil that I use in my class, undergrad class, that talks about everyday life in a coffee plantation, and there's a scene that's really cruel, violent, when the mistress enters at the kitchen and the enslaved woman is just, you know, cooking, and there is a baby in the floor sleeping, and there's flies around him. And then the mistress say, hey, you better take care of this one, because the other one, you leave him to die. So she blamed the enslaved woman who can't take care of her child and had to put them to rest in the floor with flies around. You know?
it's horrific.
Yeah,
Horrific. And
that's...
yeah, and so obviously it's so painful, difficult, and challenging to work with some of this stuff. And I know you've also worked with collections such as the Agassiz collection, for example, which perhaps you can tell us a little bit about. But how challenging is it to work, you know, maybe especially with images that were designed by racists to convey alleged racial inferiority of enslaved people?
I started to work with this collection at Harvard University during the years 2003 and 4. And then I published in 2009 a book with a part of this collection that Louis Agassiz made in Brazil. He had commissioned a small collection in South Carolina in the 50s, 50s, but this collection in Brazil is huge, has more than 200 images. And I discovered them at Peabody Museum of Harvard University. Agassiz went to Brazil. He was one of the voices of against Darwinism, evolution, and he was one of the ideologies of segregation after Civil War in US. He was a Swiss naturalist, very famous. They describe him as a charming man, you know. But then he went to Brazil. He commissioned one collection that he called Africans. And this is just one example. So we had this kind of image, what we call the type image, which is to postcards, to convey the exotic, and then the racial triptych, where you should imaginarily see the inferiority. The collection just put the person all dressed up and then stripped all the traces of culture and shows like, you know, they are, you know, like you have to observe the body. It's a somatological image, an image that you can analyze and see what's going on in the inferiority, but he never says where the inferiority resides. So it's up to you. That's seeing that you are invited to discover it. But of course, this is such a controversial collection. I always work with controversy. It was difficult to do this kind of work, but at the same time, you can see through the eyes of these people that they are asking you, how can you do that? How can you see me? Yeah, there is a response to you. So it's a very comfortable position that the scene is put on. And there's another angle that you can analyze, because seeing by close, you can see marks of whippings. You can see many scars, and you can see tribal nation marks like the cat whistle, you know, yeah, scarification, and teeth, they point, they just, some,
like canines.
No, this I can explain, sorry. Okay.
I'll think about it.
Yeah. Okay. If I have time, I can go to Google.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. You're revealing so much about these really, really rich traditions in Brazil. I am mindful of time, and I want there to be plenty of time for questions. So let's try and finish our discussion by about 6 o'clock, if that works for people, and then we can open it up to the room. So there's just a couple more things I want to ask you. One of them is about thinking about the overall significance of Brazil again. I mean, obviously we have a language barrier, especially with more and more people speaking English, and we don't tend not to speak so many European languages in schools anymore. But apart from this language barrier, why do you think in the Anglophone world this really rich tradition of Brazilian slavery, especially as regard to the history of women and gender, why do you think it's been relatively overlooked?
Yeah, because of all the other conditions of imperialism. We have a very rich tradition of slavery studies, and we have a huge historiography from different sources and different point of views, but because of the Portuguese, but as well because Brazilian people didn't speak English until recently, but students start to be more knowledgeable in English, and everything is facilitated now through internet, but still, we don't dialogue too much because, we are down south, and we are, like shattered from the other parts of the world. Sometimes, for example, you see in the historiography, people saying, oh, that's a big discovery. That I'm not to simplify, that's embarrassing. But we are doing that for 20, 30 years already, because we have some voluminous sources. Really, and slavery is the question of Brazil, is in the soul of Brazil. We have not only black people, white people like me, because slavery is not a question of them, it's a question of Brazil as a nation. Today we have Bolsonaro, maybe a huge, stupid, fascist president. And one of reasons is still in slavery, because, middle class sometimes doesn't want to acknowledge that your neighbor, the other, is a person, because we have so embedded in, you are not a person, I am, my family is something, you are nothing. you know. So this very selfish and violent, although Brazil, oh, Carnival, no. We are a violent society, you know, that incarcerated black males a lot. There is genocide all the time. That high index of violence, and that our question for all of us, if you want something else, a democracy, we need to face slavery.
Thank you. Those are important points. And so just my sort of penultimate question, really,
Yeah.
and then one more maybe for the last question. We can maybe come back to that contemporary Brazil, modern Brazil, and what you think is happening there. But what sort of research is being done at the moment, for example, among historians looking at the lives of enslaved women in Brazil? What sources are they using?
Yeah.
What sorts of research are they coming up with that you
Yeah.
can share with us?
We have a huge collection of criminal and civil records. There is high index of slave crimes in Brazil. So one of the main sources to everyday life of all enslaved people, especially women, is on criminal records. It's interesting that men, we have literally hundreds of runaway communities, quilombos. Not a huge one like Quilombo dos Palmares, who had 20,000 people living there at the end of beginning of 17th century, but small runaway communities all spread out in the territory, but they are mainly men there. Women has different behave towards reclaiming liberty or freedom or their children. And all this is in civil and criminal records. So there is literally thousands of sources that you can go for.
Yeah. And I think in that sense then, again, perhaps sort of Brazilian history of slavery differs from talking about other regimes where we're more likely to talk about an absence of sources and absence of materials when it comes to studying slavery. So again, you know, I think that the fact that there's so much documentation, again, really reveals just how different it is. Finally then, mindful of time, I mean, we're both historians who, you know, obviously it's our discipline, and we believe that, you know, that we need to understand the past to help inform the present. And you've already alluded a couple of times today to really, you know, what's happening in modern day Brazil. And you mentioned earlier that, you know, Brazil is a country, I think it's 57% of its 56% of its population defined as black or of multiple heritage. There's no direct translation, of course. The Portuguese word is pardo here, or indigenous. You know, so it's a complicated history. It's a history with a really sort of complex relationship, I think, between ethnicity and social class as well. And it's also a country that has certain sort of tropes and stereotypes that perhaps defy what we've been learning about today. You know, with the image of the carnival and you know the sort of the ideal of sort of Brazil and its racial integration. You've presented us with a very different picture. But, you know, how can historians contribute to some of these discussions and, you know, about becoming sort of better anti-racists, about thinking about how Brazil can move forward and become more anti-racist in its future?
I think we as historians, I have to believe in this because I dedicate my life to that. But anyway, that we can, you know, we can write about issues, show how things were occurring in the past, so we can feed the Black movement. And I see, when I started, I participated, I had the chance to participate to the events of 100 years of abolition in 1988.
Oh, wow.
Wow, I'm old. Then, you know, at those times, there were no Black historian, almost no one. And today, in our university, we have affirmative action. We have many policies around, you know, getting students there, social and race percentage in public universities, like my university is a public university, it's a free university, and you get everything there since, you know, medical care, food, everything.
I think we're all just sitting here thinking free, you know, so you can stop there. Yeah. But no, I'm kidding. Yeah, carry on. Yeah.
And then, you know, now it used to be 10, 15, 20 years ago, a very elitist university, the Universidade de São Paulo, which is the best of Latin America, considered, oh no, Chile has the best one. Okay, we are the second and the biggest. It's huge. But now we have social and race percentage, so the profile of students change radically, you know.
Yeah.
That's what we are doing,
Yeah.
you know.
That's so interesting, and again, I think it's somewhere from which the UK can learn.
Yeah.
It won't, but it should learn, you know, in terms of thinking about our own higher education policy. Take a breather for a moment, and there might be some more of the pictures that you want to show us, but I'm really keen that we open this up for discussion. But do join me, first of all, in thanking Maria Helena for...